In March 2011, the quiet town of Allende, Mexico, vanished. Not from a natural disaster, but from something far worse. An army of masked men rolled in, armed with assault rifles, blacked-out trucks, and a list of names. But they didn't just take names, they took families. They stormed into homes. Dragged people out. Mothers, grandfathers, even children. Then they began setting the houses on fire. One by one, entire blocks were reduced to ash. The air was thick with smoke and screams. And while the destruction unfolded, the police, they stood down. The military, stationed nearby, they never came. By sunrise, Allende was a graveyard. No sirens. No headlines. No bodies. Just ruins and silence. The Zetas cartel had murdered over 300 people. And yet, the Mexican government said nothing. Why? Because it started with a single name, leaked by the DEA. And the cartel's response was total annihilation. This is the true story of how a drug cartel wiped out a town. And got away with it. And the most terrifying part? Most people have never even heard of it. Before we dive into this insane drug cartel true crime story, I've got a quick favor to ask. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. This is True Crime Cartel, and we drop the wildest real-life stories the world tried to bury. If you're ready for an unbelievable ride, give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who loves true crime. And most importantly, drop a comment and let me know what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far this community reaches. Are you tuning in from New York? London? Tokyo? Mexico City? Let me know down below. Alright, let's get into this wild story. Before the smoke. Before the silence. Before the fire turned homes into ash. Allende was just a dot on the map. A rural town in northern Mexico. Coahuila State. Tucked between arid hills and sun-bleached roads. Nothing ever happened here. And maybe that's what made it so easy to forget, when everything happened at once. The town's rhythm was slow. Life was simple. Families lived close together. Kids played barefoot in the streets. Small businesses passed down for generations. People knew each other by name. Arguments were about cattle, not crime. But that illusion of peace was built on ignorance. Because outside the town's edge, a storm was brewing. Los Zetas were coming. But not like ghosts in the night, they came loud, armed, organized. And no one in Allende even knew their name. Los Zetas weren't born from the streets. They were born from Mexico's special forces, trained killers. And when they defected, they used that same training to build a cartel empire. While other cartels bribed, Los Zetas butchered. While others smuggled quietly, they made statements with fire and bodies. And leading this empire of violence was a man known only as Z40. Miguel Angel Trevino Morales. A former horse trainer turned executioner. Sadistic. Intelligent. Unpredictable. He wasn't just feared, he was studied. Under Z40's leadership, Los Zetas expanded like wildfire, through kidnapping, extortion, oil theft, and raw terror. They weren't a gang. They were a military-trained insurgency with no moral code. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., the USDA was working behind the scenes. Pressuring informants. Gathering intelligence. Mapping cartel networks. And they thought they had everything under control. Two informants, Jose Vasquez and Hector Moreno, were leaking secrets from inside Los Zetas. Where the drugs moved. Who made the calls? What towns were compromised? And then, someone leaked that intel. To the wrong hands. Z40 saw betrayal. But instead of hunting one traitor, he ordered the entire town punished. No one warned Allende. Not the local police. Not the military. Not even the government. And so, that weekend in March 2011, as families gathered for dinner, As children finished homework, the sky broke open, and Allende was erased. The town that never made headlines was now the site of a massacre so massive it took years before anyone even spoke its name. And the question still hangs in the air. If a cartel can erase a town, and no one stops them, what does justice even mean? But to understand how Allende was destroyed, you have to understand who destroyed it, and how they became powerful enough to do it in the first place. Because Los Zetas didn't just appear. They evolved. They trained. And when the world wasn't watching, they rose. Before they burned the town of Allende to the ground, before they became the most feared cartel in all of Mexico, the Zetas were soldiers. But not the kind who served the people. These were elite Mexican commandos, highly trained in jungle warfare, tactical operations, counterintelligence, and weaponry. Then one by one, they defected. It began in the late 1990s. A man named Arturo Guzman de Quena, a former officer of Mexico's Grupo Aeromóvil de Fuerzas Especiales, known simply as GAFES, walked away from the military and into the arms of the Gulf Cartel. Guzman was hired by Ogel Cardenas Guillen, the then boss of the Gulf Cartel. But Guzman didn't come alone. He brought others. Trained killers, GAFE deserters, former paratroopers, snipers, and explosives experts. They would become Cardenas' private army. Not just enforcers, but a paramilitary death squad. And they called themselves Los Zetas, named after their military radio code, Z. From the start, the Zetas operated differently from other cartels. They weren't born from poverty. They weren't raised in the streets. These were men trained by the government, and now, they were using that training to wage war against the very nation they once served. Their rise was swift. While the Gulf Cartel controlled the smuggling routes, the Zetas enforced order through absolute terror. They kidnapped rivals, tortured snitches, burned bodies alive, and filmed every act. Soon, whispers turned to headlines. The Zetas were no longer just muscle. They wanted their own empire. And in 2010, the inevitable happened. They broke off from the Gulf Cartel in a storm of blood and betrayal. The former allies were now bitter enemies. And Los Zetas began expanding violently into the northern states of Mexico, Nuevo León, Coahuila, Veracruz, and beyond. Their weapons? Not just AKs. They had military-grade RPGs, belt-fed machine guns, even grenades. But they didn't just fight rivals. They fought civilians too. They funded their empire through cocaine, of course, but also extortion, kidnapping, human trafficking, fuel theft, and murder for hire. By 2011, the Zetas were no longer just a cartel. They were a multinational criminal enterprise, running operations across Mexico, the US, Central America, even Spain. So how did they get so big, so fast? One word: fear. The Zetas didn't just kill. They sent messages. They left beheaded bodies in public plazas. They staged massacres and filmed them like propaganda. Their violence wasn't random. It was designed to silence towns before they could scream. And while the bodies piled up, the Mexican government said little. Officials were either bribed, threatened, or simply too afraid. Some towns reported cartel presence and were ignored. Others cooperated just to survive. Meanwhile, across the border, the US was watching. DEA agents had infiltrated smuggling routes. Intelligence was building. Names. Routes. Associates. Then, they made contact with a high-level informant inside the Zetas. What they didn't know is that their informant would trigger one of the most horrific massacres in modern cartel history. In trying to bring the Zetas down, the DEA unknowingly painted a target on an entire town. What happened next would make history. A quiet town in Coahuila, obliterated in days. Men, women, children vanished without a trace. And not a single arrest for years. And this happened before the first house burned, before the children were taken, and before the desert swallowed entire bloodlines, there was a mistake. A single leak. A quiet betrayal. And a man who wouldn't forgive either. In 2010, the DEA was running a quiet investigation into Los Zetas, Mexico's most feared cartel. They weren't chasing foot soldiers. They were after the top of the pyramid. Miguel Angel Trevino Morales, known as Z40. He was the kind of man who made people disappear for raising their voice, let alone leaking secrets. And the DEA believed one of his close associates could crack the case wide open. Hector Moreno, a mid-level trafficker with access, connections, and everything to lose. Moreno was arrested in Texas. Under pressure, and hoping for a deal, he began to talk. Not much. But enough. He named names. He sketched routes. He painted outlines. And somewhere buried in the paperwork and intelligence drops, a single location showed up again and again. Allende, Coahuila. The DEA never meant for that name to slip. But this was the drug war, and nothing stays secret forever. Some say the leak came from a corrupted cop inside Mexico's federal police. Others say it came from a U.S. courtroom. No one really knows. But what's certain is this. The Zetas found out someone from Allende was talking. And Z40, a man who once boiled his enemies alive, believed that someone in that town had betrayed him. But Trevino wasn't interested in identifying the exact snitch. He didn't need proof. He didn't want evidence. He wanted revenge. Not targeted. Not strategic. Total. If someone in that town sold me out, then the whole town burns. That was the message. The order was passed down the chain. Los Zetas operatives in the region were given a list of families linked, however loosely, to Hector Moreno. Not just brothers. Not just cousins. Entire households. Dozens of names. Generations. They weren't just hunting witnesses. They were wiping out bloodlines. The convoy was prepared. Multiple vehicles. Tactical gear. Heavy arms. Men who weren't soldiers, but who were trained like them. No police interference. No roadblocks. No warnings. Because in Coahuila at the time, the Zetas were the law. What happened next wasn't spontaneous. It was calculated. Cold. And absolutely deliberate. Allende had no idea that its fate was sealed, not by what it had done, but by who it was connected to. Trevino Morales believed someone had betrayed him. And he decided to make an example so brutal, so monstrous, that no town would ever speak again. He wasn't trying to find the leak. He was going to drown the whole town to stop one whisper. And so, on a quiet March night, the convoy moved. They rolled toward Allende, not in secret, not in silence, but with full confidence that no one would stop them. And they were right. What followed wasn't a raid. It wasn't a message. It was annihilation. What happened when the Zetas arrived, and why no one ever came to stop them? It began like any other evening in Allende. Children played soccer in the street. Fathers sat on porches with radios humming. Mothers stirred dinner pots with tired hands. The sun began to drop behind the Sierra Madre, painting the desert sky with deep, golden light. But then, the ground began to shake. Not from an earthquake, but from engines. One by one, black SUVs began rolling into town. Not quietly. Not in secret. They were loud. Confident. Intentional. The Zetas were here. And they weren't here for a single man. They were here for everyone. One by one, they moved house to house, armed with lists, weapons, and a cold agenda. Families were dragged from their beds. Children ripped from their mothers. Elderly thrown to the ground. And all across Allende, neighbors hid in silence, peeking from behind curtains, praying not to be next. In the first hour alone, over 30 people were taken. Some were shot on the spot. Others were loaded into trucks. But this wasn't just execution. This was extermination. Entire bloodlines were being erased, parents, siblings, children. The message wasn't just for Allende. It was for anyone watching. By midnight, houses were burning. Zetas poured gasoline through broken windows. Lit matches. Walked away. No resistance. No sirens. No help. Police in Allende? Nowhere to be found. The military? Silently absent. And yet, some later testimonies would claim they were told not to intervene. Told to stand down. Because in Coahuila, the Zetas had already bought the silence. By the second night, the town looked like a war zone. Smoke rose in plumes. Animals wandered loose. Phones rang unanswered. Entire neighborhoods were silent because their residents were gone. The total number of victims? Still debated. Still buried. Official estimates say 42. Survivors say over 100. But no bodies were found during the massacre. Because the Zetas didn't just kill. They disappeared. Witnesses claim victims were taken to nearby ranches, locked in warehouses, tortured, dismembered, and incinerated in 55-gallon drums. Their DNA erased. Their names struck from the world. All for a betrayal they never committed. To this day, entire families remain missing. No funerals. No graves. Just silence. Because what the Zetas took wasn't just lives. They took memory. They took history. They made a town disappear. And while all of this happened, the country looked the other way. The president never acknowledged it. No state of emergency. No headlines on national TV. Because admitting what had happened would mean admitting how much power the Zetas really had. Even as smoke still rose from the homes. Even as mothers searched for their children. The Zetas simply packed their weapons. And drove away. No fear. No punishment. No justice. The massacre in Allende didn't last a week. It lasted 3 nights. But the silence afterward has lasted over a decade. No one was arrested. No one was held accountable. And the government? It pretended it didn't happen. Another striking question is how Allende became the town Mexico tried to forget. And why the truth didn't surface until it was almost too late. Allende didn't make the headlines. There was no press conference. No breaking news alert. No viral footage. Just silence. In the days following the massacre, the surviving families returned to ashes. Entire blocks were reduced to rubble. Clothing scattered in alleys. Schoolbooks blackened by fire. Toys melted into floorboards. But there were no funerals. Because there were no bodies. Mothers searched abandoned ranches. Fathers wandered into the desert with shovels. Teenagers stood guard over the few homes that hadn't burned. And the town waited for help. For justice. For acknowledgement. But no one came. The Coahuila state government knew. The federal government knew. The U.S. government knew. But no one wanted to admit that a drug cartel had just erased an entire town, without resistance. Journalists who tried to report the story went silent. Some were threatened. Others vanished. In Mexico, journalism is one of the most dangerous professions. And in cartel territory, truth is often buried next to the dead. For 5 years, Allende lived with no answers. No recognition. No closure. Until one day, a survivor spoke. In 2016, a mother whose son was taken began to tell her story. Then another family came forward. Then another. They didn't have names. They didn't have graves. But they had the truth. And it was undeniable. Eventually, human rights organizations picked it up. Forensic experts began investigating old ranches. And what they found confirmed the horror. Mass graves. Burn pits. DNA fragments of over 40 individuals. The Zetas hadn't killed to scare the town. They killed to erase it. But the questions remained. Where were the politicians who knew and said nothing? Why did police step aside? And why did it take 5 years for the truth to surface? To this day, no one has been prosecuted for the Allende massacre. The ranchers who own the land say they didn't know. Officials plead ignorance. And the cartel men? Long gone, or dead. But the survivors? They remember everything. Because in the middle of the silence, they still hear the screams. It was a symbol. A symbol of what happens when cartels grow stronger than the government. When silence is bought, and memory is burned. But here's what most don't know. The Zetas never truly disappeared. They simply changed names. Changed faces. And kept moving. After the Allende massacre, Los Zetas split apart, not because they were defeated, but because they had grown too powerful. Their own violence turned inward. Factions broke off. Some aligned with Gulf Cartel remnants, others with CJ&G. Some became ghosts. Others evolved. The group that torched a town in Coahuila now had cousins across the country. New names. New leaders. Same brutality. In the years that followed, Zetas Vieja Escuela and Cartel del Noteste claimed the same territory. And their tactics? Still straight from Trevino's playbook. Burn. Erase. Silence. But what's more terrifying is this. The institutions that let Allende happen still exist. Many of the officials who looked away were promoted. Some were re-elected. And then came the documents. In 2017, leaked testimonies and court filings in the U.S. revealed something devastating. The U.S. knew. The Mexican government knew. And neither said a word. Because the arrest of Trevino Morales in 2013? It wasn't justice. It was cleanup. The Zetas lost a leader. But the system that empowered them, the fear, the silence, the protection, stayed in place. Allende wasn't an isolated massacre. It was a case study. A case study in how power protects violence. In how governments sacrifice towns to preserve the illusion of control. Even today, cartel splinters linked to Zetas operate in Nuevo Laredo, Veracruz, Zacatecas, and Coahuila. The same men. The same tactics. Different initials. And many of the victims' families? Still waiting. Still asking, where are our children? A decade later, the town of Allende still exists. But it's not the same. Some streets were rebuilt. Some homes repainted. But the people never forgot. And justice never came. The men who ordered the massacre walk free or were replaced. The government? Still silent. And the cartel? Still out there. Watching. Listening. Waiting. Allende is still on the map. You can find it on Google. The streets have names. The homes have numbers. But the town that existed before March 2011 is gone. The homes that weren't burned were abandoned. The families that survived either fled the state or disappeared into silence. Some changed their names. Some never spoke of what happened again. Not out of healing, but out of fear. There are children now, teenagers, who were babies when their parents were taken. Some grew up in foster care. Others were raised by grandparents, with missing faces in their photo albums. They know their family disappeared. But no one ever told them why. The state never issued reparations. No memorial was ever built. No trauma counseling offered. Just silence, and 1,000 ghosts. In Coahuila, whispers of cartel activity still float from town to town. Truck convoys still pass quietly at night. People still look over their shoulder before speaking. Because while the name Zetas may have faded, their legacy never did. And in Allende, their shadow never left. Allende isn't just a town. It's a warning. A reminder of what happens when justice is optional, when truth is inconvenient, and when the silence of power is louder than the screams of the people. The Zetas may be fractured, their symbols replaced, their leaders scattered or buried. But no one was truly held responsible for what happened in Allende. Not the commanders. Not the politicians. Not the law enforcement who stood down. Not even the governments who knew and stayed silent. In every country, we're told that justice is blind. That it works. That no one is above it. But when a cartel can erase an entire town, and the world looks away, what does justice really mean? If this story moved you, if you believe the truth shouldn't stay buried, subscribe to True Crime Cartel. We bring you the real stories the headlines skipped, and the names they tried to erase. And coming up next, one man, one tunnel, one nation humiliated. The unbelievable escape of El Chapo through a mile of underground engineering that made the world stop watching, and the Sinaloa cartel stronger than ever. Don't miss it.